Evelyn Grant had never imagined that the journey west would bring such danger. She and a small band of settlers had left their hometowns, seeking land, work, and the hope of a fresh start on the open frontier. The road was harsh, winding through forests, frozen plains, and steep valleys, with only wagons and horses as companions. Every step carried risk, not just from the wilderness, but from human nature itself. Yet Evelyn had believed that her fellow settlers were honorable. She trusted that those who shared the journey with her would act with decency. That trust would be shattered. It began with a dispute over supplies. Food was scarce, and tempers frayed quickly in the cold. A few men in the party hoarded provisions, ignoring the needs of women and children. Evelyn had tried to reason with them, arguing that survival depended on cooperation, yet her words fell on deaf ears. The tension escalated when one of the men accused her of taking more than her share. The argument turned violent. A struggle broke out near the edge of a snow-laden slope. Evelyn's heart raced, not just from fear, but from the realization that she had underestimated the cruelty that desperation could breed. In the chaos, a fierce winter storm swept in unexpectedly, catching everyone off guard. Blinding snow whipped across the landscape, and icy winds tore through their thin coats. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Evelyn, attempting to help a child who had slipped in the snow, was knocked down by one of the men in the panic. The group surged past her without noticing, or perhaps without caring, leaving her lying in the deep snow. Pain radiated through her body, a sharp reminder of her vulnerability. She tried to crawl, tried to call out, but her voice was lost to the wind. Her thoughts were a jumble of fear, anger, and disbelief. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion and hypothermia began to set in. Evelyn's limbs grew numb, her fingers turning white and stiff. She pressed herself into the snow, trying to preserve warmth as best she could. Each breath was a battle against the cold that threatened to steal her life. She wondered if she would survive the night. The realization that those who had promised community and protection had abandoned her crushed her spirit as effectively as the storm threatened her body. She felt utterly alone, with only the merciless wilderness surrounding her. Through the darkness, Evelyn's mind drifted to what she had left behind: family, home, and the life she had hoped to build in the West. She thought of the irony. She had come seeking a fresh start, only to find betrayal instead. In her half-conscious state, she felt the weight of despair pressing down, threatening to overwhelm her will to survive. Yet somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark refused to die. It was this tiny flame of hope, coupled with sheer determination, that kept her eyelids from closing completely. She forced herself to stay awake, clinging to life as if sheer will could hold back the cold. As night stretched on, the sounds of the storm became her only companions. The wind howled, trees creaked, and distant coyotes cried, their calls echoing over the snow-covered plains. Each sound reminded her of the fragility of her situation. But in that desperate, freezing isolation, a strange clarity emerged. She knew that if she survived, she would need to rely on no one but herself or on some force, human or divine, that might intervene before the night ended. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared, Evelyn was barely conscious. Her body battered, her hopes stretched thin. She had been left for dead by those she trusted, a casualty of greed and cruelty. And yet, despite the betrayal, a sliver of determination remained. If she could endure until morning, perhaps life still had a chance for her. Little did she know, the dawn would bring salvation in a form she could never have imagined, a man who would find her, tend to her, and change the course of her life forever. The first light of dawn barely pierced the heavy gray sky when Evelyn Grant lay half-conscious in the snow, her body trembling violently from the cold. The storm had passed, but the landscape remained a frozen, desolate wasteland. Every breath she drew was shallow and painful, her lungs stinging from the icy air. Her limbs were stiff and weak, and her clothes, soaked and torn, offered little protection against the frost. For hours she had teetered on the edge between consciousness and sleep, unsure whether she would awaken again. The betrayal of her fellow settlers had left her not only physically abandoned but emotionally shattered. She felt utterly alone in the vast, unyielding wilderness, and then she heard it, the soft, steady crunch of hooves over snow. At first, she thought it might be a hallucination, a dream conjured by fatigue and cold. But the sound grew nearer, deliberate and controlled, cutting through the silence like a lifeline. Evelyn's heart quickened. Could it be another settler, another human who might save her, or would they, too, pass her by like the others? She tried to lift her head, but pain and frostbite forced her back onto the snow. Her trembling fingers reached out instinctively, hoping for some form of help, some touch to guide her from this frozen grave. Through the swirling mist of snow and early morning fog, a lone figure appeared, a man mounted on a horse, riding with careful precision. His silhouette was unmistakable, a strong, confident posture that spoke of experience and knowledge of the land. His clothing was simple but practical, suited for harsh weather. A wide-brimmed hat shielded his face, while his coat, thick and weathered, kept him warm against the bitter cold. He scanned the area with alert, calculating eyes, moving slowly to assess the situation. Evelyn's pulse raced. She could sense instinctively that this man was not like the settlers who had abandoned her. There was a presence of calm authority about him, a quiet confidence that radiated protection rather than threat. The man dismounted with ease, his horse obedient and steady beneath him. Evelyn tried to call out, but her voice came out as a weak croak, barely audible over the wind. He noticed her immediately, slowing his approach as he knelt near her. His eyes, dark and discerning, took in her injuries, her frozen state, and the remnants of the violent storm that had left her stranded. Without hesitation, he lifted her gently into his arms, careful to avoid causing further pain. The warmth radiating from his body, from the careful steadiness of his hands, was the first comfort Evelyn had felt since being left for dead. This man, whom she would later come to know as Koa, carried her to a hidden winter camp nestled in a sheltered valley. His people were wary of strangers, especially those abandoned by other settlers, but Koa's determination and gentle firmness ensured that Evelyn was accepted, at least temporarily. At the camp, he tended to her wounds, applied herbal remedies, and wrapped her in thick blankets. Through his actions, he demonstrated an understanding of care that transcended words. He did not ask questions or demand explanations. He simply acted to preserve her life. As Evelyn drifted in and out of fevered sleep over the next days, she slowly became aware of the rhythms of this new, foreign world. The fire crackled, the wind sighed outside, and Koa's quiet presence was a constant reassurance. She began to understand that she was not only being saved from death, but also being offered a second chance, a life she had never expected, in the hands of a man she did not yet fully understand. His decision to protect her, despite the dangers and uncertainties, marked the beginning of a profound bond, one forged from survival, trust, and unspoken compassion. By the time she could sit up, wrapped in warmth and strength, Evelyn realized that her life had irrevocably changed. Where she had expected death, she had instead found mercy. Where she had felt abandoned, she had found protection. And it was in this moment, carried from the snow and darkness into the safety of Koa's care, that the possibility of hope and eventually love first appeared. Evelyn Grant's first conscious moments in Koa's camp were disorienting and surreal. She awoke wrapped in thick blankets, the warmth of the fire contrasting sharply with the biting cold she had endured while lying in the snow. Her body ached from injuries sustained during the storm and the fall, her arms and legs stiff and sore. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light of the lodge, she realized she was no longer in the wilderness she had known. She was somewhere entirely unfamiliar. The walls were made of timber, decorated with animal hides and simple tools, a stark contrast to the log cabins and rough wagons of the settlers she had traveled with. Everything seemed foreign, yet oddly comforting. Panic threatened to overtake her. Evelyn didn't recognize the people around her. Faces were unfamiliar, adorned with feathers and markings, and the language they spoke was unlike anything she had heard. Her pulse quickened and her thoughts raced. Could she trust these strangers? Were they dangerous? She wanted to leap up, to run, but the pain in her body reminded her that she was too weak. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and lingering trauma from the betrayal of the settlers. Koa sat nearby, a calm presence in the midst of her panic. He did not speak immediately, sensing that words might overwhelm her. Instead, he offered gestures, water, gentle encouragement, and a steady gaze that reassured her. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, deliberate, and comforting. Evelyn realized that his words carried no threat, no judgment, only an intent to soothe, to guide, and to protect. The realization that someone had found her, nursed her from near death, and refused to abandon her stirred an unfamiliar emotion. Gratitude died as the days passed. Evelyn's fear slowly began to transform into cautious curiosity. Koa continued to care for her, tending her wounds with skillful hands and herbal remedies, ensuring she ate and rested. Every act, no matter how small, reinforced the knowledge that she was safe. Even as she healed, the unfamiliarity of her surroundings reminded her that she was in a world very different from the one she had known. She watched the tribe moving through their routines, cooking, tending the animals, repairing lodges, and began to notice the harmony and skill in their daily lives. Each movement was purposeful, deliberate, and respectful of the land and each other. Evelyn's initial mistrust began to soften as she observed Koa's actions. His quiet strength and steadfast care revealed a man who had survived hardships himself, a man who understood life and death in ways she could barely comprehend. Koa never rushed her recovery. He never demanded explanations for how she came to be abandoned. Instead, he allowed her to rest, to heal, and to regain control of her body and mind. In these moments, Evelyn realized that survival was not just about physical healing, it was about trust, compassion, and a willingness to be vulnerable. The camp itself became a kind of sanctuary. Wrapped in blankets and sitting beside the fire, Evelyn began to recognize the rhythms of this new life. The warmth of the fire, the gentle crackle of the logs, and the quiet attentiveness of Koa created a sense of safety she had not felt since her family left her behind. She started to imagine that perhaps life could continue, not in the world of betrayal and cold settlers, but in this place where someone had chosen to save her. By the time she could sit up and move about the lodge, Evelyn understood that her life had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer just a woman abandoned on the frontier. She was a survivor, tended and protected by a man whose compassion and skill had given her a second chance. The unfamiliar world around her was no longer frightening. It was the first place in days, perhaps months, where she could imagine hope, safety, and even the faint possibility of connection. As Evelyn Grant's strength returned, life in the Apache camp slowly became less intimidating and more familiar. The lodge that had once seemed strange and foreign now felt like a safe harbor, its warm fire and simple furnishings a comfort after the deadly cold and betrayal she had endured. Koa remained a steady presence, quiet but attentive, his actions demonstrating a reliability and care that spoke louder than words ever could. Evelyn began to notice the small, deliberate ways he ensured her well-being, the careful way he wrapped her in blankets, the patience with which he explained the uses of medicinal herbs, and the way he moved through the camp with respect and authority. These gestures gradually replaced her fear with cautious admiration and trust. During the day, Koa began to include Evelyn in the routines of the camp. She learned to help with cooking over open fires, to carry water without spilling it, and even to ride short distances on horseback under his watchful eye. Every skill was taught patiently, every instruction laced with encouragement rather than criticism. For Evelyn, these lessons were more than practical, they were empowering. She realized that survival was not merely enduring the elements or tending to wounds. It was also learning to navigate a world that had once seemed foreign and threatening. As they worked together, a silent understanding grew between Evelyn and Koa. Words were often unnecessary, the way he observed her movements, corrected a misstep gently, or offered his hand when she wobbled on a horse conveyed as much as speech ever could. The children in the camp, younger Apache cousins and nieces of Koa, began to accept her presence, watching her with curiosity and tentative friendliness. In these moments, Evelyn felt a warmth she had not experienced since being abandoned by the settlers. It was a sense of belonging, however fragile, in a world that had previously been hostile and cold. Yet, despite this growing comfort, challenges arose. Some members of the tribe were wary of her presence. A white woman, abandoned and alone, brought uncertainty. Would she honor their customs? Could she be trusted? Koa defended her, quietly and firmly, explaining her plight and asserting his confidence in her intentions. His loyalty was evident, and it spoke volumes about the respect he had for her and the bond forming between them. Evelyn, in turn, began to feel a deep sense of responsibility, not only for her own survival, but for contributing positively to the community that had taken her in. Danger continued to linger at the edges of their world. Stories of hostile settlers, wild animals, and unpredictable weather reminded Evelyn that the frontier was unforgiving. However, Koa's constant vigilance and protective instincts allowed her to venture farther than she could have imagined, building confidence in her own abilities. The two of them developed a rhythm in which trust and reliance were reciprocal. Evelyn's courage inspired Koa, just as his steadfastness reassured her. They were no longer merely rescuer and rescued. They were partners in endurance, each strengthening the other's will to survive. By the end of the week spent together, Evelyn began to recognize a profound change within herself. She was no longer merely the abandoned woman she had been when found in the snow. She was a survivor who had been nurtured back to life, guided by someone who valued her existence not as a burden, but as a human being capable of growth and contribution. The bond she shared with Koa was unspoken but undeniable, a connection forged in the crucible of hardship. Mutual respect and unwavering support. In quiet moments, Evelyn would watch Koa as he moved through the camp, tending to chores or caring for others, and a sense of gratitude and admiration deepened. She realized that survival had brought more than life itself. It had brought a connection, a bond rooted in trust, compassion, and the shared understanding of fragility and strength. In this bond, there was the hint of something more, something that could grow into partnership, companionship, and perhaps even love once the scars of the past had been fully faced. Life in the Apache camp had grown steady and even comfortable for Evelyn Grant, but the frontier was never without challenges. One afternoon, news arrived that unsettled the fragile peace she and Koa had built. Scouts reported that a group of settlers, the same people who had abandoned her to the snowstorm, were moving through nearby territory. Their intentions were unclear, but Evelyn knew instinctively that they would not leave her safety untouched. Fear and unease gripped her, a reminder that the past she had tried to leave behind was not yet done with her. Evelyn's anxiety was mirrored in Koa's demeanor. He was calm, as always, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that betrayed vigilance. He took stock of the camp, making subtle adjustments to protect its people. Yet it was Evelyn he focused on the most. He had rescued her once, had nurtured her back to health, and had shared the long days of survival and learning. Now he faced the possibility that the world outside the camp could once again threaten her life. For the first time, Evelyn saw a side of Koa that transcended quiet strength, a fierce determination to protect her at all costs. The settlers arrived. Sooner than expected, a small party moving quickly and with confidence born of entitlement. They had likely heard that Evelyn was alive and had assumed that Koa, as a member of the tribe, had no right to shelter her. The tension was palpable as Koa confronted them, his posture unyielding and his voice steady. Evelyn watched from behind him, both terrified and reassured. The settlers demanded that she be returned, claiming that she was theirs by law, by debt, or by the simple assumption of ownership. Koa listened patiently, but his expression never faltered. Then came the moment that would change Evelyn's life forever. Koa, following the tradition of his people, stepped forward and made a formal declaration. He claimed Evelyn as his wife, not as an act of ownership, but as a vow of protection and commitment. It was a declaration that she would no longer be at the mercy of cruelty or abandonment, that her safety and dignity were now inseparable from his honor. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt a sense of certainty and security. The man who had found her in the snow, who had tended her wounds and guided her through a strange new world, now formally ensured that she would never face the horrors of abandonment again. Evelyn's reaction was complex. She felt gratitude, relief, and awe, but also the weight of the choice she now faced. To accept Koa's claim was to embrace a life entirely different from the one she had imagined, a life among people whose culture, language, and customs were foreign to her. But it was also a life free from fear, filled with trust and the potential for belonging. Her instincts told her that the man who had saved her, who had quietly nurtured her, and who had proven his loyalty again and again, could be trusted with her future. Over the following days, Evelyn began to settle fully into her role within the camp. She learned more about the tribe's traditions, earned the respect of its members, and continued to build the bond with Koa that had begun in the snow. Settlers who had once represented danger and betrayal faded into the distance, their presence a reminder of what she had endured, not what she would live with. Koa's protection allowed her to focus on growth, contribution, and slowly, love a love founded on respect, trust, and shared survival rather than convenience or necessity. By claiming her as his wife, Koa did more than protect Evelyn physically. He gave her a future. He offered her safety, belonging, and the chance to rebuild a life she could call her own. What had begun as rescue had grown into partnership. The bond between them, forged in snow, fear, and survival, had matured into a relationship capable of withstanding the challenges of both the wilderness and the human heart. Evelyn understood, in that moment, that her life had irrevocably changed. She was no longer a victim of betrayal or circumstance. She was a woman who had endured, survived, and now, with Koa by her side, had a future worth embracing. Evelyn Grant's life had been transformed from one of despair and abandonment to a reality she could scarcely have imagined when she lay frozen in the snow. Koa's decisive claim of her as his wife had done more than ensure her safety. It gave her the power to choose a future defined by belonging, trust, and partnership. In the quiet mornings at the Apache camp, Evelyn felt the warmth of the fire. Against her face, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the gentle strength of Koa moving through the lodge reminders that life could be both vibrant and safe. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly breathe, no longer weighed down by fear or betrayal. In the days that followed, Evelyn began to integrate fully into the community that had taken her in. She learned the rhythms of the camp, how to prepare meals over an open fire, tend to animals, gather herbs, and care for the younger children. Each task strengthened her confidence, and each success earned her respect from the tribe. The skills she had developed under the settlers' oppressive and chaotic environment were now being refined in a setting that valued cooperation, patience, and tradition. Evelyn's contribution was no longer met with suspicion or judgment. It was welcomed, celebrated, and valued. Her bond with Koa deepened with each passing day. In quiet moments, she would watch him repair tools, care for the horses, or teach a young boy to track the movement of deer. She began to notice not just his strength, but the kindness in his hands, the attentiveness in his gaze, and the quiet wisdom behind his actions. Koa, in turn, observed Evelyn's growth with pride, seeing in her resilience and courage a spirit that matched his own. Their partnership was rooted not in obligation but in shared experience, mutual respect, and the understanding that survival had forged a bond neither could break. Love, subtle and slow, began to emerge from this foundation of trust. Evelyn found herself thinking of Koa not only as her protector, but as a man she admired, whose courage and loyalty inspired her. She felt gratitude for the life he had given her, but also a sense of anticipation for what they could build together: a home, a family, and a shared future. Koa's care had saved her life, but the choices they now made together would shape the kind of life they would live, full of agency, joy, and meaning. Beyond the personal bond, Evelyn also recognized the larger gift Koa had offered her: acceptance into a community that valued her as a person, not as a commodity or a victim. She was no longer defined by abandonment or betrayal. She was defined by her courage, her willingness to learn, and her capacity to contribute to a family and tribe. In this place, Evelyn found a new identity, not one imposed by circumstances, but one she could shape alongside Koa and the tribe. As weeks turned to months, the wilderness that had once seemed hostile became a landscape of opportunity and beauty. Sunrises over snow-dusted plains, the scent of burning wood and fresh earth, and the quiet rhythm of camp life all became familiar and cherished. Evelyn understood that the mercy shown to her in the snowstorm had set into motion a transformation, a chance not merely to survive, but to flourish. By fully embracing her new life, Evelyn claimed more than survival. She claimed hope, love, and belonging. Koa's protection had given her the freedom to make choices, to build a family, and to be part of something larger than herself. The woman who had once been left for dead was now a wife, a trusted member of a tribe, and a partner in life's journey with a man whose courage and compassion had forever altered her destiny. In choosing the life that Koa offered, Evelyn found a profound truth. Sometimes, the life meant for us begins precisely where we are left to die. In that choice lay mercy, love, and a future built on resilience, trust, and the enduring power of human connection.